Between the Pokemon TCG World Championships, the Shuffle Squad Last Chance Qualifier for the Tournament of the Champions, random 1Ks, win a box, win a case, whatever, you need a deck that's going to perform well at these tournaments, and today, I got you covered. Hey everybody, Nick from 9Card TCG, and today we're going to be looking at matchup data for some of the most popular decks in the Pokemon trading card game. What is matchup data? What do I mean? Well, we're going to look at how do decks fare, or how do they do against one another, and we'll talk about why some decks might be struggling while others are doing well. We get this data, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but we get this data from both Limitless and Trainer Hill, so links to both of those in the video description. If you feel like clicking stuff, you can click subscribe on this channel, leave a like and a comment. Those things tell YouTube this is a good channel and other people should watch it. I have links for Dragon Shield and my Discord and Twitch and Twitter and all that kind of stuff as well in the video description, but kind of just want to get to the video here because we have a lot to talk about and I'm excited to do so. So let's head over to Trainer Hill and we'll take a look at some data. So here we are, Limitless. I want to show the meta share of the decks first before we talk about the individual matchups. Which ones do you really need to focus on and what's popular? Now this is Limitless data, so this is for online tournaments, and you can see that there's a lot of tournaments, almost 18,000 players, 256 tournaments. There's just a lot of data here, and we're looking at meta share, not necessarily win percent, because if something's really popular in the meta, one, it's likely to be doing well and winning, and two, it's something that you're likely to come across, so you want to know how to prepare for the things that you are going to see frequently. And you know, there are really three decks that we have to worry about the most. Palkia Inteleon with a little over 11%, about 11.5% of the meta. Arceus Inteleon with about 10.5% of the meta, and then Mew just under 10% of the meta. So 1 out of 3 games that you play will be one of these 3 decks. So expect to see Palkia, expect to see Arceus, expect to see Mew. Trainer Hill data, a lot of these decks you're going to see Arceus Duraludon. This goes in alphabetical order from top to bottom, so this isn't necessarily what's the best. It's not ranked like that. It's alphabetical. And we're going to start off by talking about Arceus Duraludon. The number you see here is the win percent for Arceus Duraludon. So when Arceus Duraludon goes against Flying Pikachu, it wins about 63% of the time in 74 matches played, which is a pretty good sample size. Obviously, the higher the number of matches played, the more likely it is that that matchup percent is true. Something else I want to talk about is that this data is for the month of July. The last thing that I want to say is that this information is to be taken with a grain of salt. This is not the be-all, end-all. Just because a deck here has a 29% win rate does not mean it can't win against that deck. That player can brick, that player can misplay, you might draw the nuts. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of randomization or RNG that happens in Pokemon. So I want to give those disclaimers. If you are a good player, you can beat someone who is playing a deck that you might have an unfavored matchup to if they play poorly or if you just outplay them. The first deck that they do pretty well against is Arceus Flying Pikachu. Why? Well, you just hit really hard. The double turbo energies that the Flying Pikachus and the Arceus sometimes use with the Skyscraper ability on Duraludon, you can't get hit by that, which is really nice. You also hit for 220, so you're going to be knocking out Arceus Vs, you're going to be knocking out Flying Pikachus, they tend to have Crobats, you can knock out Crobats. It's really easy to just boss KO a Flying Pikachu V, boss KO a Crobat. There's 4 prizes, now you just have to go through 1 Arceus VStar, and nothing in their deck can one-shot you, so you don't really have to worry. They do play Path to the Peak often, so that will turn off your Skyscraper, but once they get through that first Trinity Nova or 2, they're not really going to be using DTE too much, so you don't have to worry about it. It's one of those decks that you don't really care if they draw down Path because they don't have a ton of special energy to utilize. You do lose to something like Arceus Inteleon, Ice Rider you lose to. These decks again don't rely on special energies, and even so they both have paths where they can turn it off if they do happen to have a special energy. And because it's really hard for you to knock out an Arceus especially, they can kind of get into that Sharon's loop. Sure, you can do some healing, but they're probably going to be able to outlast you, and they're a lot more consistent just because you have a very small bench. You have Duraludons and an Arceus, and that's it. Whereas Arceus Inteleon has the whole Inteleon shady dealing engine. Same thing with Calyrex. Same thing with Palkia. It's that kind of thing. Palkia, you do actually have a little bit of a favorite matchup against, simply because they hit you for nothing. They don't hit you for a lot of damage because you run such a tight bench, because you have the option or ability to heal. They don't hit you for a lot of damage. You're going to be outputting a lot more damage onto them, and yeah, that's really interesting. Lunatone Solrock, you're beating them because they're single prizes. They can't put out the damage needed to take big hits on a Duraludon, 360 health Vmax Pokemon. It's healing, and it doesn't matter if you heal any damage off of their Pokemon because they're single prizes. They have 130 health or less, so you're going to be one-shotting them no matter what. So you can heal with Yell Tower or whatever, anything else that heals both active Pokemon. Doesn't matter, they're getting one shot. Genesect, Miltank, Mew, Mewtwo, Dialga, you're for the most part, you're pretty even. So we'll kind of go off of Duraludon there, and we'll go on to Arceus Flying Pikachu. We know you lose to Duraludon. You beat Palkia. I mean, you're going to be hitting something like Palkia for weakness with the Flying Pikachu, which is really nice. You can take one-shots. They likely can't one-shot you back with the Vmax. They almost definitely can't. So you're going to take a one-shot. They have to take a two-shot. So in 2 hits, you'll get 4 prizes. In 2 hits, they'll get 3. So really nice. You beat Regis. You beat Lunatones. They're basic Pokemon and Flying Pikachu. Once you get that max boom going, single prize Pokemon can't hit you. So you're definitely going to win those. But you kind of lose to a lot of other stuff. You're neutral Mew. You're slightly unfavored against Dialga. You lose to Arceus Inteleon. And you're about neutral with Ice Rider. So if you feel like, you know what, I'm going to hit a lot of Palkia at my locals, this might be a good option. But if you know you're going to hit a lot of Arceus, it might not be a great deck to pick. So kind of choose your poison. We know that Palkia and Arceus are about 10.5 to 11.5% of the meta. So you're going to face one. So either you take the positive matchup against Palkia, or you take the negative matchup against Sherrans. And why do you lose to Arceus and Inteleon, even though you have Arceus and Sherrans yourself, is because you run Bibarel. And while Bibarel is really good, and you can draw a bunch of cards, you're never guaranteed to find the things you need. So that turn you need to hit a Sherrans, you can Bibarel for 5, potentially, and not find it. Whereas I only need to play a Drizzile or a Shady Dealings Inteleon and get exactly the trainer card that I need, guaranteeing the Sherrans, guaranteeing the Path to the Peak to turn off your Lumineon or your Crobat or whatever, and I can start to target down your Vmax, hit it to a couple of times, take 3 prizes, take another 3, win the game. You have to go through Arceus VStars if you're playing against Arceus Inteleon, and it can be really difficult to do so. Speaking of Arceus Inteleon, the decks that you beat the most, Lunatone Solrock, again, single prizes that cannot put enough damage onto your Arceus. You're neutral at Palkia, which is good. You're neutral at Miltank. You're neutral at Mew. You're slightly favored against Dialga. You're pretty neutral against Ice Rider. You have a favored matchup against both Arceus Duraludon and Flying Pikachu. So if you want something that is consistent across the board, and if you are a good player, you can beat anything if you set up well enough, if your opponent draws okay enough, if they don't have sometimes Palkia, they go first and they hit with that cross switcher play turn 2 and they're just knocking out Arceus V-Stars or Arceus Vs before you get a chance to evolve. Nothing you can really do about that, but if you can survive that first turn or 2, establish your board, get your Sherrans loop going, it's going to be really hard for anything in the game to beat you. Recently, people are starting to throw in maybe like the Radiant Charizard for that last-ditch effort to just one-shot a V-Star. I'm not crazy about it, but some people like it. Arceus Inteleon, by the way, is the deck that I play the most. So if you go against me, you're probably going to be playing Arceus Inteleon, just because I really like a deck that can handle anything that you throw at it because of that Sherrans Care Loop. And now with double Pal Pads, you run 2 Sherrans, 2 Pal Pads. Theoretically, you could Sherran 6 times in one game. I mean, come on. And then even if you do knock out an Arceus, you're doing 310 damage to get 2 prizes. And if you don't, I'm going to heal all that damage. You have to do it all over. It's very annoying to beat. And I love it, except when I'm going against it, and my opponent's drawing a lot better than I am. But anyway, something that can one-shot Arceus Inteleon is Calyrex or Ice Rider Calyrex with Inteleon. Now, you don't guaranteed beat Arceus Inteleon because you do need quite a few things. One of the big challenges with Calyrex or Ice Rider is that you sometimes get stuck into a Melony loop, which means you have to get an energy on, Melony, and then attack. You do 250. Choice Belt, you do 280. Most Arceus, when they see that Ice Rider, they're going to look for a Big Charm to get to 310, which means now you have to Leon or have some other damage modifiers, double quick shooting, Zigzagoon Ping, quick shooting, Radiant Blastoise, which you can't even do to the active. It's really hard to get to that 310 mark with Ice Rider because you have to discard both energies in order to attack or to do the most damage you can. Max Lance, you could discard 2 water energies to do 250 damage, but that's not enough to one-shot an Arceus V-Star or even a Palkia V-Star. But it just, if you can get the one-shot, that's really cool. Maybe they missed the Big Charm, maybe it's prized. Maybe they couldn't find it off of the Drizzile because they needed something else. I don't really know. Path doesn't really hurt this deck as much as you want it to. Marnie doesn't really hurt this deck, Arceus Inteleon, as much as you want it to, simply because Shady Dealings is really easy to recover from a Marnie and a Path, and Arceus Inteleon plays Path itself, so whatever. Some of the decks you do beat are things like Mewtwo Miltank. You can beat Arceus Duraludon, but you do lose to Dialga. They're a metal deck, so yeah, that makes sense. You kind of lose to Regis because they have the Regis Steel, which can do a lot of damage, and it's only a single prizer. You lose to Palkia pretty hard. You lose to Mew. You lose to, we talked about Dialga, your neutral flying Pikachu. There's really not a ton of reasons to play Ice Rider unless you are a newer player and you pick up the League Battle deck. I think it's a great deck for new players because the Inteleon engine is a great sequencing tool. It really teaches you how to play the game in the order in which you should play things. So if you're really concerned about Mewtwo Miltank for some reason, maybe it's like a deck at your locals that you just can't stand, and the rest of the people are playing something like Arceus Inteleon that you're a little unfavored against. They're playing things like Arceus Duraludon, Arceus Flying Pikachu, things that you might be slightly unfavored against but can still win. Maybe it's not a bad option, but I do think it's probably best for newer players who are just getting into the game, need a competitive deck to pick up, and with the League Battle deck, it's super accessible. Something that will be accessible very soon in the future is Dialga. Pokemon is releasing Dialga V and Palkia V boxes, which is super, super cool. Love that they're doing that. And Palkia is one of those decks that you have to love. There's really not a ton of reason to play it. You lose to Palkia pretty hard. You lose to Arceus Inteleon. You lose to Mew. So, you're losing to the big 3. So, there's not a lot of reason to play it competitively if you're trying to win a tournament. But the times where you get to pull off those Star Chronos attacks, take a second turn and then Metal Blast something out of existence. I mean, what more could you possibly ask for? It's such a fun turn, such a fun concept. You're losing to the big 3. You could beat Ice Rider, not even hitting for weakness. You're not even winning all the time. You're winning 60%, but you're favored against Arceus Duraludon. You're favored against Regis, slightly favored against Mewtwo. There's not a ton of reason to play it. It's just if you really like the deck, you like that turbo aspect, and you want to take 2 turns in a row, you kind of want to stop your opponent from playing the game, maybe Dialga's for you. Lunatone Solrock is a deck that I personally like. It's a deck that I built for my wife. She loves rocks and earth science and all that kind of stuff, so I thought this was a perfect deck for her. And come on. You lose to Duraludon, you lose to Flying Pikachu, you lose to Arceus Inteleon, you lose to Palkia. What are you really beating? You're neutral to Ice Rider, you're pretty neutral to Dialga, you're neutral to Regis. So really the only thing you're beating is Mewtwo Genesect and Mewtwo Miltank. So if people at your locals are trying to stall you out with Mewtwo and Miltank, or you just really hate Mewtwo, or Mew, or really I guess either. If you hate those purple psychic Pokemon, maybe Lunatone Solrock's the deck for you, but otherwise, fun deck, super cheap. So if you want like a fun, casual deck to just play around, it's enjoyable. But outside of that, unless you have like a really good reason, like your locals are filled with Mewtwo's and Mews, you probably don't need to play it, right? Speaking of Mew, the former top dog of the Pokemon TCG is still pretty good. I mean, the things you lose to are Mewtwo Miltank, they can just heal all that damage you do to them. Lunatone Solrock, they are a single prize deck, so it's really kind of hard to deal with. You beat Regis, which is a different single prize, but Regis just isn't that great, so it's a little easier to deal with. Lunatone can kind of build up these big boards, like these big energies, boss up something KO, and it's a little annoying to deal with. But Mew is still pretty neutral to things like Arceus Duraludon. Arceus Duraludon hits really hard, you hit really hard back. Who sets up first, who gets those first attacks, those big first knockouts, that's going to be the person who wins. Arceus Flying Pikachu, same thing. It's going to be who sets up. Can Mew put the pressure in that very early stage of the game, or can Arceus, any Arceus deck really, if you look at Arceus Inteleon, Arceus Pikachu, Arceus Duraludon, they all kind of hinge on the same thing. Can the Arceus deck survive the first 2 turns? If they can, they have a good chance of being able to win. If they can't, if Mew is able to come out too hard with at least a Sparkle Mel at a KO, an Arceus V or Duraludon or something like that, you might be in a little bit of trouble. But that's the gamble you take with Mew. Mew decks, Mew Vmax, you need to be able to come out swinging, taking that KO. If you whiff a KO that early and your Meloetta gets knocked out and now 2 of your Fusion Strike energies are gone and you have 1 on the Mew and like the bench Mew or something, boy, it's going to be really, really tough. So something to keep in mind, but Mew is still a good deck. You're still going to be able to, you're still beating Regis, you're still favored against Ice Rod, you're still favored against Dialga, you're slightly unfavored against Palkia, just because, again, it's hard to hit those 280 numbers, even harder to hit 310. They're going to hit you really hard. You rely on a full bench. Palkia decks love the fact that Mew has to play a full 5-card bench. They can throw down Path, they can throw down Temple of Sinnoh. They have options to kind of turn off some of your stuff, attacks. Cross Fusion Strike does not matter if the Fusion Strike energy is turned off, because it is double colorless and you run double colorless energies yourself as Mew. But maybe for something like to stop the Meloetta from coming out, then Cross Fusion, the Temple of Sinnoh, turning off Fusion Strike energies does matter. Turning off Fusion Strike energies does matter if you're trying to ping damage onto something, soften it up, use an ability onto something. Now you can with Temple of Sinnoh in play. Path of Peak also really just hurts Mew decks. So Path Roxanne can really hurt a Mew deck. Marnie Path can really hurt a Mew deck. And these are things that are fairly common in the format at the moment. So while Mew is okay, it can still do well. You still do have your challenges against things like Arceus and Palkia, things you don't want to have problems against. Mewtwo Miltank is probably the deck I know the least about. I haven't seen a ton of it. I know the general plan is to use Super Regenerator over and over. Use Miltank to stall until you can get a Mewtwo V Union in play. You can maybe do some Psy Explosion damage, spread 13 damage counters across your opponent's board, and then you just Super Regenerator and heal all your opponent's damage away until you put them in a position where they either A, are going to deck out, or B, can't do enough damage to you before you're able to KO and take your last prizes. It's usually deck out from my understanding, but some things that you do lose against: 6.4% win rate against Lunatone. Why? Because they can knock out your Miltank very easily before you ever get your Mewtwo V Union in play. You can't stall a Lunatone deck like that. They're attacking turn 2. Even if you go first, their first turn they're attacking. If they go first, they're setting up to attack and hit into that cow super, super hard. You do beat things like Mew. Again, they can't really do enough damage to ever knock out your Mewtwo. And if you can deal with the Meloetta early enough, then Meloetta's not that big of an issue. You beat Arceus Flying Pikachu. You're neutral to Arceus Inteleon. You're neutral to Duraludon. You're unfavored against Dialga. Again, hitting into something and taking a second turn can really make it hard to win the game when your opponent gets to go twice in a row. You do lose to Regis, which is super weird, but again, kind of for the same reason that you're going to lose to, say, Lunatone, is because they can attack pretty quickly and deal with your cow before you get a chance to set up and get a Mewtwo V Union in play. If you can get a Mewtwo V Union in play, you're probably coasting, because they'll never be able to one-shot you. Super Regenerator will heal all the damage that Reggie does to you. But yeah, it's just getting that Mewtwo V Union in play can be challenging. One of your cards is prized, you're stuck. If one of those things is prized and you can't get it out with a Peonia or something, you're in a lot of trouble. Palkia, the same thing. Maybe you could stall them out long enough to get the V Union in play. But if you suddenly have to take a big board and they come out with a Greninja and start hitting you, they have Starmie in the deck and they're using Swift, which can go through abilities, you start to run into some issues. So if you like a little bit of stall, you like a little bit of control, then this might be the deck for you. But do know that some of the weird things, some of the jank that you might hit in early rounds of a tournament, hit on the ladder of someone at your locals, can be really problematic for this kind of deck. Palkia is the new best deck, or at least at the very least tied with Arceus Inteleon as best deck in format, and you have a lot of favorable matchups. You're beating Calyrex, you're beating Dialga, you're beating Lunatone, you're beating Reggie, you're favored against Mewtwo Miltank, you're favored against Mew, you're slightly favored against Arceus. The things that you're not beating all the time are Arceus Duraludon. Again, Arceus Duraludon just has a very small bench, so you don't put out nearly enough damage. They can heal, and they're hitting you for 220 consistently. And Arceus Flying Pikachu, again, once they get through that first turn or two and start to Trinity Charge, Trinity Nova onto a Flying Pikachu Vmax, it is very hard for you to be able to come back and do anything about it. They're going to be one-shotting, taking 2 prizes. You have to minimum 2-shot them. It gets really challenging. And even if you do knock out that Pikachu Vmax, they already have an established board with things like Bibarel, so you can't path Roxanne them as easily because they can just draw back up to 5 with Bibarel. Becomes really problematic. But Palkia, while you can do really well, again, being neutral roughly to Arceus Inteleon, being slightly favored against Mew, means that you do not have a large margin to misplay. You have to draw well and play well, because otherwise these decks can easily beat you. So Palkia is a tough deck to play, and being able to play it perfectly and properly with whatever hand you get is challenging. So while it's top dog, it's top dog for a reason. High skill players can bring this deck to victory really frequently. But if you don't, you see a lot of these favored matchups can kind of start to crumble, and that's where those losses really come in. The last deck is Regis. It's not a very good deck. What are you beating? Mewtwo Miltank, okay. Even Mewtwo Miltank, what's its meta share? What is it? Not even 2%. It's 1.5%. So you're like not even, like, who cares if that's your best matchup? It's something that you're gonna hit 2 times in if you go a 9-round tournament, you might hit it once, maybe twice if you're super lucky, and that's your best matchup. Everything else, you're slightly favored against Calyrex. You're losing to everything else. I mean, everything else is beating you. It's just not a very good deck at the moment, even though it's still fairly popular at 4.5%. So, again, it's similar to Lunatone Solrock. It's a budget deck, very easy to get the cards. It's very cheap if you want to just get into the game. It can kind of teach you some sequencing. There are some really cool high-level plays you can make with the deck, but sometimes, even if you do make those plays, it's not enough for it to really matter. Even something like Lunatone Solrock, you're slightly favored against, but I don't really consider 47 to 53% to be favored or lose against. Actually, you're slightly unfavored. I don't consider that. I still think that's neutral. But yeah, that's all the decks. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, found this a little informative. If you did, do me a favor, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know your thoughts about these matchups. What decks do you are you worried about? What are your thoughts on a particular matchup? If you have a lot of experience with it, I want to know. Helps me learn, helps other people learn. And yeah, that's going to do it for today. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time.